morning, everyone. Glad that you are here at the happiest place on earth, and hopefully you can find that happiness in the midst of the great learning that we have. We have a brief hour, and we have a very full room, and so I'm going to invite you to feel psychologically safe, even as you sit very comfortably next to your neighbor. As mentioned, my name is Danny Kim, and this is Dr. Tina Beranbaum, and I am an organizational consultant for a global consultancy called Centauric. And we support leaders and organizations at pivotal moments to gain clarity, to create alignment, and ultimately take courageous action. And before I was here, I was a career counselor using a strengths-based methodology to help our students design a calling.
I was going to suggest that people come and sit on the floor if you feel comfortable, and then I looked down and I saw you, so thank you for feeling safe to do that. I'm Tina. I started my career as a professor in the sociology department at McGill University in Montreal, and realized that I had this really amazing love of variety, and so I went into consulting, which is something that I personally am much more suited for. And as was mentioned, I was at PwC in Canada, made the brilliant decision to move to Southern California 11 years ago and haven't regretted it since. I hate to talk about myself, which is why I said please make it short and sweet at the beginning. But I do want to tell you a little bit about my life. And particularly I want to tell you about a year in my life. And I want you to imagine this. It's the year before the previous presidential election. I'm working in Washington, D.C., and it is a war zone. And I don't say that lightly. There were landmines everywhere. People were throwing each other under the bus everywhere. There was no safety. The CEO was an autocrat. He had a team of 4 other people. One was a narcissist. I'm a sociologist, not a psychologist, so don't take that too seriously, but he was a narcissist. Another was a bureaucrat. Another was the local historian. And the final one was a harasser who ended up being removed from the company. And in that environment, I was tasked with trying to transform their culture. Sounds like an impossible task. It was the growing edge of my consulting, and it wasn't that long ago. So I've been consulting for a long time before I really found my growing edge. And I'll say that I'm not sure if we were 100% successful, but we definitely moved the needle in the right direction. And I learned more than I ever could have learned anywhere else about the importance of psychological safety. Now, this is a very full room, so clearly you think it's a very important topic, and I hope we live up to your expectations. I also think you know a lot about psychological safety already because of the experiences that you've had, the thinking that you've done, perhaps actions that have been taken in your institutions. So I want to start by having you talk amongst yourselves about what is the definition of psychological safety. Because one of the things we want to do, Danny and I today, is to give you a couple of models to think about, but also to have a clearer picture of what that definition is, because I think it's thrown around a lot and people aren't necessarily talking the same language. And I want you to discuss what is your definition of psychological safety. And we're going to have a fun way of sharing that at the end of about 10 minutes. So talk amongst yourselves. Great. So thank you so much for your definitions. And because no one has put in their names, I may borrow one or more of them for the next time we give this talk, because some of them were absolutely fantastic. So we walked in here with a basic definition of psychological safety, but you could read up there that there were clearly some themes. So it's got to be something about a climate in which people are comfortable about being and expressing themselves. It also has to be an inner belief that you're not going to be punished for what you are, who you are, or what you do. So making mistakes is an okay thing so long as it's something to be learned from. And then knowing that others are going to have your back. They may not agree with you, they may not like what you said, but they're not going to hurt you. So I want to punt it over to Danny, who's going to be talking about why this is so important right now, especially in a university and college setting.
Why do we care about this? Why does this matter? First of all, our current climate is begging us to talk about this. Climates like Me Too, there's a heightened awareness for harassment, these kinds of issues, and there is more courage in our current climate to call out the bad actors. Right? So this is an important issue that we need to discuss and bring up. It's relevant for our times today. Secondly, there's tons of research that shows that when there are unsafe environments, it actually creates a lack of engagement, which actually kills productivity, which actually kills then profitability. So when Tina and I were discussing this, we thought, profitability, that's not an education question, or this isn't the right context. However, it is, because our customers are our students. And when they don't feel safe in an environment of education, they don't come. Recent studies show that the US loses about $300 billion a year to lack of engagement. Right? So there's an ROI to this as well. And then finally, there is an upsurge in anxiety. In a recent study by Duke University, there were 6,000 university students who were surveyed, and they found almost 25% of the students were on some sort of anti-anxiety medication. So there is already a heightened background of depression and anxiety, whether it's real or not, but this is a real thing that we need to address. And they are entering into the workforce with a heightened sense of awareness. Right? So this is why we need to begin to think about psychological safety, not only in the education sector, but also as we think about sending them into the workforce after college. This morning, we're going to talk a little bit about the neurobiology of safety, and there's three kind of components that we want to address. First one is this, the stressors that we experience in our lives. The other piece is affiliation, how stress impacts us within group context. Right? We don't live in isolation, and so there's people sometimes can be the stressors. Right? So we have cultures of stress potentially, or things that get in the way of our ability to feel psychologically safe. And then ultimately, reactivity, how we respond to those things within each other, within ourselves. Individually, we have certain propensities in our biology that allow us, for some of us, to be more resilient, and others of us that are more prone to being afraid or fearful and being pushed by these stressors. And I want to tell you a story. My wife and I, we love to go camping. Anyone like to go camping? One of our favorite places is Yosemite, just right up north. And we frequent our camping up there sometimes. And a few years ago, my wife and I, we decided to go camping, and we spent all day hiking. And you know that moment when you get late at night after you've made your dinner and the s'mores are done and in your stomach, all you want to do is get in your sleeping bag. Right, so we had checked out for the night, and my wife turns to me and she says, "Danny, did you put all the food away?" Because rule number one, when you go camping, you put the food away. You put it in the bear boxes, right? And I said, absolutely, absolutely, because all I do is want to go to sleep. I'm tired, I'm exhausted. And then an hour later, kid you not, I hear something. And this is what was near us. Pretty intense, right? I hear some laughing. Wasn't laughing in that moment. My wife was petrified. And I sat there, and she said, "Are you sure we don't have any food?" I realized that I had left beef jerky in my hiking pants. Probably the worst thing you could possibly put in. Everyone could smell beef jerky, especially a bear. So I unlocked my car, ran out, threw my jerky pants into the car, and ran back in. She said, "Did you see the bear?" I said, "No, I didn't see the bear. I'm not looking out there with a flashlight." Next morning, sure enough, there was a bear. Our neighbors in their comfortable RV said, "Yeah, there was a bear right by your tent last night." I said, "Thanks for helping us, you know." Now I know go camping, right? What reaction did you get when you saw this image of this bear? What did you feel? Fear? What else? Right, stress. In this moment, when we experience something as petrifying as this, we have a biological response. And now this default biological response is innate. It's given to us because we need it sometimes, right? All fear and all stress isn't bad. Sometimes it's good. What happens in our brain is that our amygdala releases cortisol and epinephrine, which actually increases your heart rate, takes away blood from your digestive system. I was not thinking about beef jerky in that moment, right? And it actually heightens our awareness so that we can respond either fight or flight, right? So I could have either fought the bear or I very quickly fled from the bear right into my tent because that was my immediate response. But what happens is that there is this background of stress in our culture right now, right? In our workplaces, in education system, a recent study shows that 60% of people are stressed by the current political climate. I'm surprised that it's not more than that. So they are walking into education systems already afraid. So when a professor gives a bad grade to a student, what happens? You don't like me? I don't feel safe. I need to leave this classroom because I don't feel safe. And it actually hinders our ability to be able to engage and focus. Now, I want to flip the script. Let's take a look at this photo. What do you feel? Stress? Yeah, go back to the bear. But absolutely, some of you feel stressed, but some of you felt a sense of connection, right? A sense of, oh, that's so beautiful, that's so cute. If only they always look like that, right? But in most times, we feel that. The opposite of stress responses when your amygdala releases cortisol and epinephrine is the opposite. We release oxytocin. And oxytocin is actually found in high doses in mothers who are nursing their newborn child. And those mothers who actually have a hard time bonding with their child actually are given increases of oxytocin to kind of stimulate their ability to connect with their child. Oxytocin actually increases our ability to feel good. It increases our empathy with one another. It increases pro-social behavior. And so within the education context, we actually see an increase in collaboration. We see an increase in trust. We see an increase in productivity, which ultimately increases profitability, whatever your metric for that is. For us, if you're in a faculty context and you're in a teaching context, that increases learning. That's the end product, right? We want the students to learn. If you're in administration, you want an environment where faculty are collaborating with one another and the staff are supporting those initiatives, right? So we want to see higher levels of oxytocin. And there's actually some interesting things on mirror neurons. It is these neurons that actually shows that when you are in a particular environment, you begin to reflect those things in that environment, right? So if you are in a context where it feels psychologically unsafe, you will begin to feel that way, and you will respond in that way. Now, the positive side of mirror neurons is that you can actually create environments of psychological safety. You have the ability to change the way people respond. There's some research that's done that when you clap for somebody, they feel good. Right? There's oxytocin is being released. And so how often do we get to clap for our students or for our faculty? That's a positive reinforcer that can enhance psychological safety through the release of oxytocin. I'm going to provide our equation for psychological safety, and then Tina's going to talk about some of the elements. The equation for psychological safety is leader, culture, and the individual, all divided by self-orientation. When we have better developed leaders, healthier cultures, and we have individuals who are resilient, and we have a lower sense of self-orientation, which is really your ego, right? When you're less concerned about protecting yourself within a culture and within a context, we have the opportunity to raise the psychological safety.
I'm going to focus first on leaders. We've all heard the expression, the tone is set at the top. And it's very true. There's a real paradox, though, if that's the right word, in the academic setting, because what kind of people get chosen to be leaders at the very top? Are they chosen because they've got great leadership skills? Or are they chosen because they do fantastic research? Are they chosen because they have an academic brand that is well known? So I'm seeing like lots of heads nodding. The same thing happens in other sectors like government, where people are put in positions of authority for reasons that have nothing to do with their ability to really lead other people. And I want to encourage you to be thinking in the academic setting about who are the leaders. At Centauric, we have the simplest definition possible. Leaders are people that elevate the performance of others. Anybody can be a leader. It doesn't matter where you are on an org chart or where your position is. If you positively, and sometimes negatively, but if you influence individuals, you are a leader, which means that students in a class can be leaders. The faculty at the front of the class is a leader and hopefully a mentor. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then you've got the administration of the university or the college. They're the formal official leaders, but everyone has an opportunity to be a leader. Now, when we're looking for formal and official leaders, we often are looking for very similar characteristics. When you admire a leader, what characteristics do they have? I want you right now to imagine a leader, somebody that you really admire. Could have been someone from your childhood, someone you've read about, someone you've met, someone that mentored you. In your mind, have you got a picture? Kathy, your current director, one characteristic.
Integrity.
Integrity, great. Your pastor.
So one word would be encouraging.
Encouraging. Gandhi. And one characteristic? Compassion. Your choir teacher. Inclusive. This is who came to mind for me when I asked myself the same question. Nelson Mandela. And indeed, he's got some of the characteristics that were mentioned here today. In the world of selection, when organizations are selecting leaders, do they tend to select them for integrity, compassion, inclusivity, or do they tend to select them for other characteristics? I do a lot of work in industry. I do a lot of executive coaching, and I find that the people who tend to get selected initially or more quickly are the people who have charisma, who look good in what they're wearing. They actually tend to be taller, which for a while I resented and then I just gave up on it. I would say that in many of the organizations, private companies, publicly traded companies that I work in right now, a lot of them are men. There's nothing wrong with men. I have two sons. They are wonderful human being adults. And so I don't want, this is not about men bashing. It's not about bashing anybody. We're a psychologically safe group here. The research shows that those are not the right leaders. Those are the people who I call the shiny pennies. They're attractive, they're charismatic, they look right. So we do a lot of work with the Hogan organization, and they have found that there are, rather than these charismatic shiny penny characteristics, what are the most important characteristics of a leader? You've already mentioned them. One is integrity. What does integrity mean? Mm-hmm. You do what you say you're going to do. You give credit where credit is due. You're consistent. You have values. Doing the right things when no one's looking. That's one of the characteristics. Another characteristic, vision. Leaders are not leaders unless they have followers, especially formal leaders. So vision is incredibly important. People need to feel some kind of inspiration for why they would follow that person. So how does that play itself out in a university or in a classroom? As a graduate student in Ohio, I had a fear of statistics and methodology. I was horrible in math in high school. I went to graduate school and I thought, I'm not going to get my master's degree. I'm not, because I have to take these 4 statistics and methodology classes. I'm a failure. It's going to be horrible. But what happened? I had a statistics professor who was the son of a pastor, so he taught like this because he learned his body language from his father, and he had an image of how statistics could be practical, and it could save people, and it could solve problems. And he inspired me to get beyond my fear of math and my biological incapability of doing math. And I became a statistics and methodology minor. People also have to have expertise. So a leader needs to be very good and know what they're doing about something. It doesn't even necessarily have to be about what you are looking at them for. And finally, a leader needs to be someone who wants to share themselves. So being a mentor. What does it mean to be a mentor? Develops others, elevates others by teaching them and modeling for them. They give of themselves in the service of another. They share their expertise. You know, when Danny first came to work with us, it was, okay, Danny, here are the models. Here's how we do things. Come with us when we go see a client. We shared of ourselves. There's a generosity about being a mentor. And mentors help to navigate the landscape that a person has to navigate. They can either get impediments out of the way, or they can try and help people with some political decisions and maneuvers that they have to make, etc. So those are the characteristics of a great leader. But it's not just about the leader. The leader, whether they're in a club, whether they're in a classroom, whether they're the provost of a university, they are instrumental in creating a culture around them. And we've got 5 components of culture that we look at. The first is guiding values and behaviors. And I wish I could put behaviors in capitals, but I didn't do that. Because in that first organization that I told you about, the first value that they had in their list of values was integrity. I also told you they were very willing to throw each other under the bus to save themselves. That is not integrity. So it's values plus what are the associated behaviors that you expect from each other that relate to those values. And in the organizations that are really forward thinking right now, they're actually putting as part of their performance assessment those behaviors because they want to ensure that they're reinforced. It's not just about values and behaviors, it's also about having clear pragmatic policies. So if you think about psychological safety, there needs to be a container in which a person knows that there's somewhere that they can go if they feel unsafe in some way, whether it's psychological safety, physical safety, etc. There needs to be focused skill building. One of the things that I've noticed in industry, and I'm also on the board of advisors for the USD School of Engineering. One of the things I've noticed about students is there's been a decrease in their ability to have contactful, skillful conversations. Lots of people say things, they don't mean harm, but they don't know better. So part of it is building the skill about understanding each other, about developing empathy, about developing emotional intelligence, and part of it is building the skill of being able to have the conversation. So if someone says something to me that I feel is, that makes me uncomfortable, it behooves me to say something about it. How many of us innocently ask questions, not realizing that we might be making the other person feel uncomfortable? There needs to be collective and individual responsibility. So not only does the institution and the leaders in the institution, the leaders in the classroom, need to take action if they see something that is creating an environment that is not safe, but so does the individual need to step up. The individual student who feels uncomfortable because somebody else had something said to them that was uncomfortable. It's very important to have somebody who understands human dynamics, policies, and how to train people at the leadership table. In the institutions, organizations that we work in, we really try to have an HR leader at the table helping the rest of the leaders understand what's necessary. So we've talked about leaders, we've talked about culture, and now I want to talk about the individual. How many of you relate to the picture on your left? So a few people in the room. How many people relate to the picture on the right? And some people relate to another picture that's not up there. The bear, yeah. The bear, the baby, whatever. All of us are born with a biology where we're more or less sensitive to the stimuli around us. And that's something that's very important to keep in mind as we wonder why someone's having a much stronger or weaker reaction than we are. So I've talked about the difference in reactivity that's biological. We all can create coping mechanisms. We'll talk a little bit about that. And in fact, Danny's going to talk next about resilience.
So how would you define resilience? Good. Be able to bend and not break, kind of when there's challenges or there's this toughness that we have. Yeah. Maybe one more. Yeah.
The ability to learn.
Ah, yeah. And we're going to talk in just a moment. We'll talk about that. But the ability to see adversity as a learning opportunity, not just detriment, right, to who you are or to what your learning opportunity is. So we're going to talk a little bit about individual resilience, and I'm going to share 5 different components and what we can do a little bit about that. So number 1 is fear. We have to address fear, and sometimes fear is not just the thing in the moment, but actually might be tied in with some of your past, right? It could have been you watch the news the morning before you go to work, and you come into work fearful, and then you have a bad performance evaluation, and maybe it might be tied to that. So we have to be cognizant of what are the real fears that we face, and are we dealing with some of the fears that we have that are unconscious in our systems. Next is this, EQ, emotional quotient or emotional intelligence. It is extremely helpful to build resilience when we understand our own emotions and the impact that we have on other people's emotions. So understanding how we might impact people's triggers for stress and how we can diffuse some of that. Being able to pay attention to people's body language and tonality and how we can be able to foster high levels of emotional safety. The other thing is this, stress. There's all sorts of stress that we experience both in the moment and as a long term. So the question that I want to invite you to consider is, what are you doing to cope with stress that is both long term and short term? So long term, it might be taking up practices such as meditation or yoga, becoming more centered with yourself and thinking about how can I deal with stress on a larger level. And the other part of it is in the moment stress. So when you're in a meeting, back-to-back meetings, maybe you're going into this next student teaching session and you have the stressful moment, what do you do to cope with that stress? Do you take 5 breaths and breathe? Do you go for a walk outside? Do you make sure you tend to all your biological needs? Eat some food, for example, right? Oftentimes we can get so crazy busy and that we don't even know that we're actually adding other kinds of stress. So we go in charged to certain meetings, and that can cause a sense of lowering psychological safety. Well-being. Well-being is more than just emotional or psychological well-being, which we've talked about. Consider financial well-being, right? If you're feeling like stressed about your paycheck and your finances, that can add to the sense of lowering your resilience and also coming in with a more of a charge experience into certain situations. So think about well-being holistically, financially, socially, mentally, emotionally, physically. How do you feel? Are you taking care of your body in that way? And then finally, connection. Social connection really is the piece that we're talking about here, right? There's plenty of research to show that when we have tight-knit social connections, it actually enhances our longevity, our health, our ability to create and collaborate. And remember what we talked about earlier, oxytocin, right? So when you have a stressful day, then you go spend some time with some close friends or family, you have the ability to recharge and take away some of that cortisol that's still within your body, right? Getting to relax. But most importantly, I want to talk a little bit about mindset. What do you think mindset might mean?
Kind of your perspective or the way you're viewing things?
Yes. Yes, the way we like to describe it, it's like a picture frame. What picture frame, or I'm a videographer as well, what lens are you putting in front of that camera? It's going to change your experience of that perspective. So if you have a challenging perspective, ma'am, as you said, do I see it as something that's hard that I'm going to fail at, that's going to be a detriment on my character, or is it an opportunity to enhance my learning, to actually know that this is for my good? No pain, no gain. Right? So that mindset is very positive. It would have to change. Even Tina and I were prepping for this talk yesterday, and we both had to look at ourselves and say, we will have fun, because there's a lot going on, but we need to change our mindset, right? Because we could either look at this moment that we get to spend some time with you as something in our day that we have to drive up from San Diego for, and it's a pain, you know? Or we could say, man, this is an opportunity for us to interact with colleagues in different industries and really get to share some of our experience and share with one another. So we had to change our mindset, hopefully lowering our stress levels. So just to recap, Psychological safety is enhanced when we have high capacity leaders, the right kinds of leaders, high integrous leaders. We've got cultures that support these kinds of leaders, right? We also have policies in place. And then finally, we have individual, both their capacities, their individual biological capacities, and some skills we need to build, whether that's coping mechanisms of stress, thinking about your well-being, thinking about your social connection. These are incredibly important to raising and elevating psychological safety. All of this is divided by self-orientation. So self-orientation is when the ego gets in the way. And what do I mean by that is that when we have heightened levels of stress, we actually come in with the perspective of self-preservation and self-protective behavior. That can sometimes come at the cost of throwing other people under the bus. When that happens, your self-orientation is skyrocketing because it's about you. The opposite of that is when self-orientation is lower, we actually enhance our empathy and we have a greater opportunity to actually see people through their own lens, through their own perspective. Think about a culture that says, I see where you're coming from. I want to understand where you're coming from. That lowers self-orientation and as a whole increases psychological safety. I'm going to invite you one last time to pull out your phones, and this could be for everybody. Which element do you believe is a strength of your organization? Excellent. So what are we seeing here? What do we see? Is a strength within this group? Culture. For those of you who texted in culture, what were you thinking? Collaborative. Yeah, collaboration. People are working together. Shared values, yeah. We're not going to do something that doesn't align. Yes, sir. Yeah. So even if people come and go or whatever, there's a healthy culture that stays intact. Yeah.
Freedom to take risks.
Freedom to take risks. Yeah, it sounds like psychological safety. Right? When I know that I'm going to share my idea and I'm not going to be reprimanded or I'm going to be judged or I'm going to be thrown under the bus. Okay, so Tina's going to wrap it up.
So far, we've been doing the kind of the feel good about psychological safety, but there is a dark side. Whenever you take action, there is a reaction. And sometimes there are reactions that you want, and sometimes there are unintended consequences. There are 3 unintended consequences that I have seen play themselves out in the psychological safety space. The first is the cult of victimhood. I used to do a lot of work in prisons, and there were people who were going, woe is me, I have this particular background, my parents were particularly like this, and blah, 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 blah. Totally disempowered themselves or were totally disempowered. Other people with exactly the same background I was interviewing who were executives in organizations. And so what the focus on things like microaggression, the unintended consequence, is that people start to think of themselves as stuff happening to them. They don't think about, well, what can I do about it? They think, who do I go to help me? Do I go to the CEO? Do I go to HR? Do I go to my pastor? There's nothing wrong with any of these, but if the person is starting to feel like a victim, like all these things have happened to me, I think that is doing a disservice. Is how do we empower people to take care of themselves when these situations arise? Because there's always going to be bad actors, and they're not all white people, and they're not all old people. Think about how do we disempower ourselves. The other is weaponization. I can only give you one example that I know psychological safety was used as a weapon. It was at a summer camp. There was a young girl, about 12 years old, who was misbehaving in an extreme way. A male counselor went up to her and said, if you don't stop doing what you're doing, I'm going to have to take you to the camp director. She looked at him and she said to him, if you tell me what to do one more time, I'm going to go to the camp director and I'm going to tell him that you touched my private parts. And she meant it. And so that's something that we really have to be very careful about. And finally, identity politics. In trying to protect people and keep them psychologically safe, we run the danger of not looking at them as an individual, but looking at them as a member of a group. You know, a woman, a young woman, an older woman, a black man, an Asian person. Like I've just done some work in a gaming organization, and in that gaming organization, somebody told me a story that I couldn't believe. She just said, like, everybody is focusing on who I am, and that I'm a woman, and they're stepping on glass that they don't want to break. And finally, I wouldn't have done what she did, but she went in and she said, she went into a board meeting, she said, "The vagina's in the room." I would not have done that. I can't believe I just said that in public, but she just couldn't stand. Everyone was so careful with her that they actually weren't in contact with her. And she didn't know what to do to break it other than to be completely outrageous. Now we think that psychological safety, it's in the air, it's this new thing, we've got this new awareness, we're finally evolved as human beings to the point where we can see it. I personally believe nothing's new. Danny's heard me say this, nothing is new. The first quote that I found about psychological safety, although they didn't call it that, was from Hillel, who lived between 110 BC and 10 AD. That's a long time ago. That which is hateful to do not do to your fellow. Do not judge your friend until you have stood in his place. So the message going forward that we hope that you take is that, number one, empower yourselves, empower the people around you to take care of themselves. 2, empathy. Try to step in their shoes and see what the world looks like from their point of view. And that could also be the person who said the thing that makes someone feel psychologically unsafe. And 3, take responsibility. Take action, and take action immediately. Thank you.